Yeah, so just to get back again, I mean, we basically have been pretty successful for the past 3 years in securing in the chem bio or civil and environmental side. So I'm just going to share our experience of what works and what we have learned so far and what you could do to improve your applications. So if you look at the agenda, basically we are going to have a brief overview of the scholarships. So we are not going to talk too much because I guess a lot of university webinars and every other things you guys would have known by now. Uh, we are going to clear some myths. I mean, some common doubts that you have. I'll give you a brief overview of the selection process for 1 year at least. And after that, we are going to move step by step on how you could improve your area of research, research contribution, CCV, proposal, leadership statement, and reference letters. So if you, I mean, in a way, this is a bit different from what university talks are because they are more general. And I mean, they cannot trim it down to a certain area. We are going to tell you basically for, especially from the engineering side of applications, what we believe or what we have seen to be pretty effective for the past 3 years. So just to start with, I mean, a brief overview, probably you guys know about it. The Vanier is around a 50,000 for 3 years. Eligibility is for international PRs and Canadians. NSERC CGS-D or PGS-D are basically CAD 35,000 to 18,200 depending on where your application ranks. And other than that, you also have some kind of similar applications. For example, uh, UBC has KLM awards, which are pretty similar. Every other university would have something which is pretty similar to this. So these kinds of approaches or what we are going to tell you are pretty, I mean, are going to be, we believe that they are going to be helpful for you for securing these awards or strengthening your application for these awards. So just to start with some common myths, I mean, a lot of people think of it that the application process is a lot of work and it's not worth giving some time. So I guess all of you probably have applied or are thinking of applying. So this is already a good step because you have to do this at someday. Basically, if you're not doing it now, you might have to do it for your banting or your NSERC postdoctoral or any other thing that comes in the middle of your graduate studies or after your graduate studies. So good that you have started. All the work that you have done is going to be helpful for your future applications, especially in strengthening those applications and using these materials for those applications. One other common myth, which was that these workshops or like these scholarships pay a lot of value on your peer-reviewed publications. So let me give you a statistic or basically the experience that we had. So Abhishek got his Vanier in 2018. He had around 3 papers. I got mine in 2019 with the CGS-D as well, and I had three. Carl got it last year, and he didn't have any papers. So this is, I mean, one of the common myths that you're having your papers or all other things are very important. It's basically how you sell yourself. I mean, the idea is for you to be able to showcase that you have the potential to get this funding and you can get a lot of publications or can get it in the form of a very fruitful research. But it does not matter what your previous or your past experience have been on this. So as I told before, when you're, I mean, once you're applying, the main things for your applications are your presentation and writing skills. So essentially the quality of your research proposal, leadership statement, research contributions, they are going to be very important. So how you present it and how you write your applications are going to be very important. And that's what is the main focus, or that's what we are going to talk about in today's workshop on how you can improve the already prepared documents that you have that can take you up. So, of course, as I said, your academic and research qualifications matters, but as grad students, I guess all of you have certain qualifications that have got you here anyway. So probably everyone who's attending the workshop today has the caliber to become a Vanier applicant. It's basically how you sell it. So I'll tell you about the selection process, and in the middle, I'll also stop because I'll ask Abhishek to provide his input and his experience on all these things. So starting from the selection process, I mean, I can show you. So CHB is Chemical and Biological Engineering for UBC. So basically what happens, your applications go through a binning process. And it's the same for the national competition and it's the same for the university competition. So for example, if you are from the civil engineering department or the chemical engineering department or any other department, your department has a limited nominations. So for example, chemical engineering might have 4 people to nominate. Then they move to applied science, and applied science might have around 30 nominations to send forward to UBC. And then UBC does this bidding process to select the top 20 to 24 for NSERC. So as you may see, this is all, so NSERC is basically everything from sciences to engineering and all other fields. So how does this bidding process work? Well, you have reviewers, uh, and they basically divide the applications in three. So if you see the total nominations of 162, that was for 2019, they awarded it to 54 people, so 1/4 of it. And what they do is, or what the reviewer does is, they rank your applications in bin 1, 2, or 3. If your application is in bin 3, it's never discussed. So it's basically a debate between bin 2 and bin 1 that takes around 6 months or 4 months of review process. And that's why it takes long, because there are different reviewers from different fields and they take out applications from bin 2 and they discuss over time why this application is in a bin 2, why it is not in a bin 1, and then applications keep moving back and forth. Uh, I mean, this is what my understanding is. Uh, Similar thing happens for the NSERC, CGS-D, PGS-D as well. Your top few applications get ranked as CGS-D, the rest get as PGS-D, and some are never discussed. So it's kind of a similar process, I believe, just to have an idea. So Abhishek, you want to add something on this?
Yeah, maybe a couple of things. Before adding, I'll just give my background. I got the Vanier in 2018 and I therefore applied in 2017. And I actually started my PhD in 2017. So actually I applied for the Vanier even before I started my PhD. So the first myth that Fuhar spoke about, that you really need to have a strong research background in terms of your PhD, is actually not true. I'm one example where you can even apply for the Vanier right when you're starting your PhD and you have a shot at it. In terms of the process, I think a couple of questions that I usually get is, when can I expect to hear from the university, when I can get nominated? And the other is also this bin process. So the first is, you will only hear from the university if they have chosen to nominate you or not. So the department actually does not notify if you've actually been nominated by the department or even by applied science. And you can probably expect to hear from them within a month. So if, say, the deadline is August 31st, you'll probably hear from them end of September. And once they get back to you, usually have a 3-day period over which they give you a few suggestions that you can tweak your application. And in those 3 days, you can basically even alter your proposal a bit if you want to, or if you've had any extra achievements, you can actually add them in that 1 month. So that's the basic timeline. And once UBC has nominated you, you basically have a wait of about 6 months until April, when you hear the results from the national competition. And in terms of the bin system, just to add to what Fuhar said, for the Vanier scholarship, I think even between bin 1, if you're a rank of 1 to 30, I think there is pretty much no discussion in terms of whether you'll be awarded it or not. It's only rank 30 to, say, about 70, where every selection committee puts their nomination forward and they actually meet again and again to discuss who they should be nominating for the scholarship, and therefore they re-rank people again, and then it's I think the first 54 people who get the scholarship in the NSERC quota, and then same for um, the medical as well as the SSH, the humanities quota as well.
Yeah, thanks, Abhishek. So pretty helpful. So yeah, I mean, the major or the primary goal of any application should be to get in the top two bins at least. If your application is very strong, as Abhishek said, it might be in the top 20 or top 30s and it will never be discussed. I mean, you'll probably get it. But if it is in that gray zone, where it can go here and there, it's always good to have it in the top 2/3, just to make sure that at least your application is discussed. or at least someone is there to back it up or get it in the debate of why this application is in a bin 2 and not in a bin 1. Again, and going back, the score. So a score of usually a 6 plus overall. So you might have a lot of points in academic, leadership, or reference. But an overall score of 6 plus is pretty much a sure shot of getting you in the top 30s or at least in the top 50% of the applications, or like these top 2 3 bins. So your application can be discussed. So the primary goal should be to get your application in the top 2/3. And one of the ways we found that to be pretty helpful was through the presentation skills and the writing skills. So that's what we are going to tell you today on how you can get your application if it is going to probably get ended up in a, I mean, if it is not that strong enough to get into um, the top thirds, how can you make sure that your application for sure gets in the top 2/3, or try your best to get your application in the top 2/3?
Sorry, we have a question, which is, what is the time requirement for Vanier application? For example, for NSERC, you can apply within 48 months. Can you apply if you're at the end of second year for Vanier? Yeah, you can. I think
Yeah,
the limit is 24 months from the
yeah.
start.
I mean, we'll get back to these eligibility questions. This, I mean, after this talk, so we'll help all of you with all your questions by the time we finish it. But you can, yeah, you can certainly post your questions if it is pretty relevant. We'll discuss that too. So once again, think about why a federal agency is going to fund your work while you're writing your applications. And the thing that we see is probably to get a recognition. So they want to get a recognition in international presentations, international podiums. They want to get a recognition in top journals of your field. They want to see this work leading towards collaboration, getting outreach. And again, this is public money. So the federal agency is responsible or is answerable to the public. Now, think of any project. Why, I mean, whatever gets funded, most of them are something that if someone from the general public can see it, they can relate to, or they can, for example, be like, well, this is a project that's funded by my money that I can understand. So that's why you see a lot of medical related work getting funded, because everyone knows cancer is a big thing, or Alzheimer's disease are a big thing. So your goal should be to highlight your work in a way that a general person from the public can understand its relevance and see its importance. And once you are able to do that, I mean, the federal agency also can think of, I mean, so funding it in a more positive manner. So the first important thing that you need to select is, I mean, it's one of the areas where all of us do a lot of mistakes. At least I did a lot of mistakes with, is the area of research. So first year I selected my area of research in chemical engineering because I was in chemical department, but my work was on water treatment, so more environmental related. The next year I chose a more environmental engineering related area, and I mean, I was pretty successful in that. So my idea is that one of the reviewers, or the first reviewer from the field that puts your application in different bins, is someone, or he or she is someone who is from this field. So if you relate your applications, for example, if you do a water related work and you put it in chemical engineering and a process engineer comes and sees it, he or she might not be able to relate to your work or see the significance of your work as closely as someone who's in a close in a field from environmental engineering. So your application might actually go in a bin 2 instead of having in a bin 1. The other things are that two of the reviewers for sure are someone who are not from your field, and they do it to make sure that a certain field doesn't get funded too much. For example, you cannot give all the CIHR awards to cancer research. They want to have a diversity. So they have different reviewers from different fields evaluating your applications. So make sure it's something that anyone can relate to or anyone can understand. Again, one very important thing is that they are just there to reject your application. The review committee is going to see thousands of applications, so they are just there to reject it. So don't give them any reason to reject it right away. And we'll talk about what you can do on these topics. Ashik, you want to add something?
No, I think you pretty much covered everything.
Okay.
I would just reiterate that make sure your research proposal and contributions is simple enough for anybody to understand, not just somebody in your field. So don't use any strong use of language in terms of your field, or if you're using abbreviation, just make sure you basically use the whole
Yeah.
yeah, the expansion of the abbreviation.
All right. So getting on the presentation and writing skills. Basically, this is what we have seen in our experience. It's something that worked for the three of us. So we are going to tell you how and what we did. So we use the CRI approach, which is the context, rule, and impact, or context, role, and impact. So for every application or everything that we used, we tried to relate everything with these three important things. So I'll give you an example. Your research contribution statement. I mean, let's start with that as well. So in this, you have to select your top 2 or 3 scientific contributions and write them in 1 page or 2 page, whatever the limit is for that scholarship. Maybe for NSERC and Vanier it varies. So for example, this is what I wrote for my master's thesis title. So you can see, basically, I just selected the title, I wrote the context, I wrote the role, and I wrote its impact. Now, for the role, I'll again emphasize on the words like I proposed, I initiated, I wrote the first manuscript, or I wrote the entire first draft of the manuscript. For impact, I mean, it's always good to show this work resulted in this many number of publications, or this many number of international conferences, or this work initiated a collaboration with something. So it's always important to highlight these things. And one other thing that you can do is to use underline, which is a very important or a very useful tool for these applications. So for example, in the impact, I'll highlight the word collaboration. I'll highlight the word proposed in my role, or I'll highlight the word I wrote the whole first draft of the manuscript. Things like that. Uh, Basically, for the reviewers to, when they see it, it should look clean, and also they can in first glance be able to see, well, he initiated a collaboration, he wrote these things, his work has done this many things, and it's easy to read when it's broken down in the 3 categories, because that's how they evaluate your work anyways. So you're in a way helping them understand your work, instead of writing this in a whole paragraph, which is pretty complex, and then the reviewer has to dig in and figure out the things out of it. So important considerations are white spaces. Basically, keep your document as clean as you can. Try to use fewer words. I mean, we all have that mentality that I did so much work. It's better to write everything so that the reviewer or the person reading it might feel that I have done so much work, but it's always good to keep it short and keep something, I mean, just highlight the important things. Uh, Also, very important to keep everything in the specified margins and font size. As I said, they are there to reject your application. So the moment you do something or deviate from these things, it's a sure shot no, and then they'll probably put you in a bin 3 or a bin 2. So make sure everything that you are submitting is within the margins and within the font size of the specified application. Text, if possible, try to keep them evenly justified on both sides, so not aligned to the left. And as I said, underline certain things that are very important or that can just improve the document. So if I just print your page and just see certain things, I will be like, well, this application deserves to be reviewed again. So it goes to a bin 2 or a bin 1. And one important thing, as Abhishek said, avoid jargons. So basically, words that someone who's not from your field might not know, you should try avoiding them. So what you can do is make a friend of yours read your application who's not from your field, and whatever he or she asks, uh, those terms are pretty much jargon. And what you can do, I mean, I'm not saying that you remove all the scientific terms from your application. What you can do is maybe in a line or two, explain these things before. So if there's something like, uh, like I was doing work on algal toxins, so there was these contaminants called microcystins. So I wrote 1 line or 2 line of explaining what microcystins are and what kind of contaminants they are and how they come in uh, algal bloom affected waters. And then I use that term microcystins in my document. So you can use jargon, but the thing is you have to explain it so that the person reading it knows what it is. Abhishek, you want to add something more?
I just wanted to add a couple of things for the research contribution bit. There might be a few of you who have multiple research contributions. One thing is, don't try to cram up everything in one page. Just choose the ones which are most relevant to your current PhD topic and the one that you're actually applying the funding for. And the second thing which I find very useful in all of my applications is making it sound like a story rather than this is just your contribution. So remember, the person who's actually reading it does not really know anything about what you've done before or why you're actually doing this. So maybe before the context, the role, and the impact bit, just start off with why you actually took up this project or why this interests you, and then end it with how that work contributes to, or the experience from that work contributes towards your current project. It might not always be possible. For example, you might have done an internship in, say, cancer research, but you're also currently doing something um, in studying drugs. But just try to see if there is a link between the two and how your past experience kind of ties up with your current research.
Really important point, so please note it down. Again, getting back, next part is CCV. So that's what I mean, this is the CRI, or the contextual impact approach, I adopted for my CCV. So in your CCV, I mean, it's the longest document that you have. It's always good to keep things clean and present them in a logical manner. So if you do these, the same contextual and impact way of presenting your manuscript, your thesis, the events that you have organized, and all other things that you have listed down, it's easier for the person reading your documents to understand it, instead of you writing one big paragraph of what your work is. Again, try highlighting certain words if you can. That's also going to be helpful, so that they don't have to read your entire things, but they can just get the main flavor or main impact out of it just by briefly overviewing it. And again, for published papers, as Abhishek said, you have to, in a way, I mean, this also relates to that, that you have to specify why you selected certain journals, why you did this work. And also important to say certain things like, this is the best journal in this field. For example, I can tell you, I work in the field of environmental engineering, and we have this journal called Water Research, which has an impact factor of around 10. Now, if someone from chemistry is reviewing my application, they will be like, well, in comparison to Nature Nanoscience, this is like, which is an impact factor of 30 to 40. This is probably a low end journal, and they might not think that it is a good journal. But for the field of environmental engineering, an impact factor of 10 would be like really good. So it's always good to mention in your CCV, or wherever you're writing your applications, that this is one of the best journals in the field. And in a way, if you can, also try to get your reviewers or like your referees support that by, by their reference letter that's saying that he or she wrote the paper in this field, and which is very, I mean, one of the best journals in our field, and things like that. Again, I'll just show you the titles that I used for my 2017 and 2018 application. So you can see, trying to keep a more general title is always better. Also, you can, I mean, try to have a global relevance of this work. So try to tie it to something that when an application or a reviewer sees it, they feel that this has a global implication as well as Canadian implications. So this just for a reference. Abhishek, you want to add something to this?
No, I think you covered pretty much everything.
Now, yeah, the most important section. So the proposal. I mean, the proposal is the one that basically governs or gets you the application, or like is one of the most weighted research contribution statement that, most weighted research point statement that has to be very clearly and cleanly explained. So again, but you can use the same rule of the context, role, and impact. And in this, I mean, the context can go to an introduction or a background. The roles can basically cover your objectives and methods. And in the impact section, you have to stress on the work's global and Canadian impact in separate sentences you can. I mean, you have to highlight both the global impact as well as the Canadian impact. Don't forget, you have to add the nominating institute's relevance. So it's very important to add that. So keep some space for that. Don't skip on this session, this section, because it's very important. Now, especially for the proposal, I mean, it's the most tricky part is the role part, because you have to write objectives and methods, and that too in like the half or one page that you have basically after writing the introduction sections. So what we did for the past 3 years, and we have been pretty successful in doing this, is explaining it in a very simplified manner. And I call it the ADFD approach because Abhishek used it, and then I also used it. I used, and did something, I mean, added something to this, and then Carl used it and he added something to this as well. So, but this is something that we have been doing. And I realized that this is something we can use to make any project sound very good. So basically you can use this formula for any project or any research proposal, and it will really sound good to someone, especially when you're writing a general application like the Vanier or the CGS-D. So basically a stage one, I mean, you divide your work in stages. So your stage one is basically you do an experimental work in the lab. Stage two, you just do mathematical modeling of your experimental data that you have collected. Stage three is doing some studies in the real world. I mean, you can certainly add more stages depending on how well defined your project is or what you feel with, but this is a very good way of presenting your data, especially in stages. Now, getting back on how we modified it, well, in stage one, basically, if you do experimental work in a lab, you can add objectives related to that specific part of research. So these were the objectives that we were trying to answer. You can add a research question to that as well. So basically, it makes it look more scientific and a more professional in kind of a doctoral project. And then you also can add some hypotheses in it. So basically you have stage one of your work, which has certain research questions, such certain objectives and certain hypotheses that you have to fulfill. And then you can add a brief description of what you're going to do and why this is important, 1 to 4 lines. Similarly, you do the same thing for stage two and stage three, basically, or all the stages that you have broken down your project into. And this makes your project look very professional as well as very impactful. So, and as I said, any project in the world could probably be integrated in these these three stages, or at least, I mean, these things cover a certain section. Maybe you don't highlight it too much, but that's what we have figured out in the past few years, and it's pretty effective to write it this way. Abhishek, please add something if you want to.
Yeah, I wanted to add a few things for this part. The first thing, again, to reiterate what Fuhar said, is this approach of using stages is it's pretty much like using chapters out of your thesis. So you're just telling people that this is the plan, these are the steps in my thesis, and this is how it will contribute towards the overall project. But in terms of the structure of writing the proposal itself, what I have seen that's worked well for three of us is you start off with the global context first when you're writing your proposal as to what is the problem that actually exists and what you're trying to address. And then you come to the proposal itself, the technology or the science that you're trying to propose. And then after that, you move on to what your objectives are, what your research questions are, your hypothesis, and then end it with why you think, for example, you should be carrying out this project in the current group that you're in, or why you think your university is best to do this research, why you think this research will be impactful, and finally, what are the collaborations that you can do through this project. I think one thing we really undermine is the number of collaborations that you have. So if you do have collaborations with other universities or supervisors, mention them because they are important. The other thing I will say that really helped me was in the 3-day period that I had between UBC nominating me and them actually submitting my application, I literally was working about 12, 15 hours every day with my professor in completely redesigning my whole proposal. So my advice would be, since you already have time now before the 31st, go through your proposal with your professor or supervisor once you've actually drafted it down, simply because they have probably already submitted a proposal of their own to get funding for that project. So they know the way people actually fund projects really well. So if you have the support of your supervisor, please make sure you really get them to review your research proposal before you submit it to the committee. Yeah.
Yeah, and one more thing you can add or you can do to ease the reading of your proposal is to add some kind of diagrams or tables
Yeah, of
if you
course.
can, uh, in a way, because think about someone reading an application or someone reading 1,000 applications. You see like 999 of them having text, 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 and there's one that has a small figure in it, which explains kind of the introduction part, or maybe the methods part, or the objectives, or whatever it is. But if it has something different, it's going to catch the eye. So try making your application a little slightly different from others, and think on ways you can do that. I mean, this is one of the ways of presenting your data or like presenting your objectives and methods in this format. You can also add tables, you can also add figures if you want to. So that's one thing.
Just one more point. This is not a must, but if you're making any factual claims, please make sure you add a reference. It's like writing a paper. So if you're actually making a claim that your research is this is important because of this fact, please make sure you have a reference so that if anybody wants to actually know more about it, they can look into that reference.
Yeah. And again, I mean, the idea is to make it friction-free reading. So, I mean, the friction-free is basically a term that I mean, you can use for anything, doing your experiments, I mean, that's the thing that you learn in a doctoral degree anyways. But try to make your application friction-free, or meaning that it's easy to read for anyone who wants to see it, and having white spaces or like empty spaces in it is very important. Again, important thing, cover all points as Abhishek said, have to include the role of the nominating institute, role of collaborations. So you have to do that. So don't mess on that.
I want to address one more question which I've gotten in the past before we move to the leadership part, which is, do I actually need to have data to write a good proposal? No. Your proposal can just be a simple path towards the end product of your project. So it's just a design. You don't really need to have any results or show any data. I would actually suggest not to show any data because people most likely won't understand it. So just make sure you, in very layman terms, you just put forward what the objective is and what your hypothesis is.
Nice. Yeah. So moving forward to the leadership part, again, the same thing, context, role, and impact. So try to cover every paragraph that you write in your leadership statement in these roles. Again, getting back to the overall problem, what you did, and what the impact was. And in role, I will again specify you have to write, I initiated, I proposed, my work resulted in this collaborations, papers, or whatever. So try to highlight your role in it and underline it or get it in a way that people or like the reviewers would like reading it. Again, your reference letters. So your reference letter should be something that support all your claims. So basically whatever you have claimed so far in your research contributions, your leadership statements, and every other things, CCV, it should, so you have to play very strategically and divide it between all your readership or your academic reference letters, so that all of them highlight something different, but they also support whatever you have said completely. So uh, basically, I mean, this is very important, especially in case because people get the same kind of leadership reference letters from say multiple professors that say the same thing. So the idea is to have a diversity or kind of try to divide all your achievements in and get it written in different formats by different people. And also contact people who know your work very well, so they can write a very good reference letter instead of you just contacting someone who you took a course with, for example. Because these documents need good reference letters, and the quality of your reference letters matters very much, especially in these kind of scholarships. Again, one important thing that people, I mean, probably the last thing I'm going to talk about today as well, but it's one important tool that people don't, or the applicants don't use too much. I mean, it's something in your armory. You should use it very wisely. So your special circumstances letter, and it's basically for highlighting reasons for anything. I mean, it could be extended projects. Why have your papers not come yet? If you have done any field work or if you have done any community service other than or like up away from your master's research or doctoral research things, you should highlight it here. Because one important judging criteria is your ability to finish projects on time. I mean, if you look at the judging criteria, it's something that they value very highly. So if you had a break in education, you highlight it here. If you had an extended undergrad, you highlight it here. For masters, I mean, I didn't realize it in my first year when I applied. I did a 2.5 years of masters, and I thought, I mean, it's normal and no one needs to know. But that impacted it in a negative way because the reviewers might have thought that, well, he took around 3 years to do a 2 year worth of master, so it's probably not worth funding him for these 3 years because the project might not get completed in that period. So highlight your the reasons if you have any extensions, and also use this document. I mean, it's one page document, so try to use it wisely for explaining things that you have not explained previously. For example, in your research contributions, you might not highlight a community work that you have done or a field work that you have actually done for your work. So you can add it here and just say that my project got extended because of it, and this is what I did it there. So it's also a supporting document for that. So yeah, I mean, the final thing I'll show you is my scores, what I got in 2017 and what I got in 2018, just for your reference. But you can see how writing skills changed the marking and all other things. I mean, all the things that I have spoken before. Those were the things that took my scores from a 4.75 to a 7.6. So as I said before, it's very important to have a good presentation and writing format for your things. And just to make sure that you don't do these mistakes, you can get a similar score easily from your applications, because you can see, I mean, I didn't have that many papers. I didn't change much from 2017 to 18 other than improving the quality of the documents that I uploaded. Last but not the least, once you're in the 2/3, so it's also a bit upon your luck. I mean, you can understand, right? Right now we have around 34 participants. NSERC has around 50 seats. So it's a high chance not everyone is going to get it, but it's also not, uh, I mean, it's also dependent upon luck, but it's also your responsibility to make sure that you send your best application, because it's going to be worth it once you get it out. So there are other factors like your journal articles, conference papers, non-peer reviewed papers as well, and non-peer reviewed conferences uh, that are important. Especially, it doesn't matter whether you're a first author or a last author in it, because Vanier and NSERC both value any publication equally. So even if you're a first author or a last author, you'll be valued in the same way. And add articles that are in preparation if you can in the CCV. That's also a good thing. Or articles that are under review or under revisions. That's also something you can add to make sure that, and get it supported in your reference letters by your supervisor or whoever you're working with. Uh, yeah, that's pretty much it. Abhishek, you want to add something too?
Yeah, I actually wanted to add something about the leadership statement, but we already have one question regarding it. So maybe I'll comment when we take the questions. And Freya, can you add Carl? I think he's already here.
Again, so it's time to not invent something new, but it's time to strengthen whatever you have or all the applications materials that you have. With that, we'll take questions and help you with all the questions that you have.
Okay, so I'll take the second. We already answered the first one. The second one is from Mehrnaz, and the question is, can you explain more about the leadership statement? What kind of activities would be considered leadership? Okay, so firstly, I think what we did not do was break down the point system. So Fuhar mentioned that you should have ideally a point of 6 and above. Now, the way you're given points is there's an equal contribution from research, academia, as well as leadership. So I think one thing that applicants really underestimate is your leadership contribution towards your actual score. And I think it's pretty important, because if you think about it, as Fuhar already mentioned, if you're applying in your first year or second year, all of us pretty much would have a similar research background, and we all have similar attributes. But what can really set you apart is your leadership scores, because I'm pretty sure whoever is applying has good academic scores. And I think it's a leadership statement where you can really go bonkers in terms of your creativity and what you actually put forward. And I cannot reiterate enough that nothing is too small enough to actually put on there. On your statement, obviously put the stuff that you think are the most relevant and probably the biggest achievements that you have done so far. But anything as small as a volunteering work for a conference or an NGO or any organization is counted as a leadership contribution. It can be from any field. It doesn't have to be academic. I had stuff on there from my time while working in the theater, while being in sports, also while if you have done any entrepreneurial work, that really counts. So if you have actually started something new, a company or an organization, So it doesn't really have to be anything as an award or a scholarship that you have gotten before, or if you've been the president of a club. Anything as small as being a volunteer goes a long way to adding towards your leadership statement. Just make sure when you're mentioning your achievement, you mention why it's important and what skills you actually learned from it. So for example, if you're saying you were a volunteer with an organization, make sure you mention that the skills I learned was team management and working with my peers and learning from others' experiences, which I think will help in my PhD. So it's all about how you can intertwine your experiences with your application, and not a lot about what your achievements really are. Obviously they count, but it's all about how you present them to people. I hope that's helpful.
I'll just add one point. I mean, there was a question, do we need to go back? How long do we need to go back? You can go back as long as you want to. I mean,
Yeah.
it's basically what you present. One important thing is to review I mean, Vanier Online has this thing called the reviewers guide. Basically, it's a whole big PDF that is basically for these reviewers to understand and mark your applications. So if you see those things, you can break these things down into different sections. So try to address all those points that are in that breakdown of the points, and try to cover all of them. I mean, you cannot be an entrepreneur and you cannot just highlight yourself as being an entrepreneur in all your leadership statement.
Yeah.
There are around 20 different categories, which probably have like 1/4 of the point each. That makes your leadership of 9. That's my assessment. But still, I mean, if you can cover around 10 or 15 of those things, there's a high chance you might get a score of 7. So try not to, I mean, even if you are an entrepreneur, you had a successful business, try to relate and get all the other things. I mean, it has teamwork, it has publications as a part of it, it has grant writing as a part of it. So try to highlight all other things as well, just not highlight that you were a business entrepreneur in that. So read those reviewer guidelines very carefully and try to design your application based on
And
that.
also don't put everything on the leadership statement. If you have too many achievements, put them on the CCV, and then make sure you pick up the ones which are relevant for your statement. Carl, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, well, first of all, hello everyone, my name's Carl. I'm a chemical engineering student and I got the Vanier last year. I applied in my second year of my PhD for my first time and I got it. So I mean, it's a 2019 application and I was just approved. So, and so I was kind of in the background there for the presentation by Flora and Abhishek. But kind of with the overall recommendation I would give is think about like the overall story arcs that you want to tell and how you're going to sell yourself. So when I did my application, I wrote down on a piece of paper, I think I need to talk about this. I need to talk about this. This is one of my weaknesses. So I need to make sure to explain that. I need to include, there's probably 5 or 6 different things that you want to sell yourself about. So write those down on a paper and then think about what sections you're going to use to explain all of those. Maybe 2 or 3 of them can be talked about in leadership statement. For me, I had less research experience. So I used the research contribution section. I needed to make sure that talked about that part of my story arc. There's a question about how far back you go for your leadership stuff. It depends. So in your leadership section, what is this part of your story that you're trying to tell? If you have things relevant to your story, but if you were an entrepreneur and that happened 7 years ago, but if you think being an entrepreneur is important to your story of why you're going to be one of the next leaders of research in Canada, then absolutely include that stuff. But if that's not important to your storyline, then maybe don't include that. And you can even use things like your reference letters from people. You can say, please try to touch on this. Like, I'd like you to mention this part. Because you have such a limited space, it's really important to maximize what the objective of each piece of your application is. And thinking about that overall story arc of why you're the right person to receive this, I think really, really helps with that. So, okay. We'll go back to
Another
some of the
thing
questions.
I'll just add on to that is your leadership reference letters. Make sure the things that you actually mention in your leadership statement can be, addressed by the people who are giving you the leadership reference letter as well. Like, they can actually attest that you've done this contribution or you've had this contribution. So make sure you're choosing relevant stuff for both them as well as you.
And that, again, thinking about like the overall and back it up on your CV CV coordinator of the application.
Okay, Fuhar, I think the next question's for you. It says, did you apply with the same topic or did you have to change the topic in 2017 and 18?
So I applied probably I applied with the same, in the same area. I applied with the same kind of a little bit modified, research proposal, but yeah, it was the same. I reworded my title. As you can see, it's not too different. It's just that I presented in a different ways, but it was all the same, all same. So one thing I would say to everyone is, a lot of you probably are first time applicants, so it doesn't matter if you apply in the first year or in the second, but it's always good to apply in your first year. Even if you don't get it, you might get it in the next year, because you now know, or after this experience, you'll know what other things, once you get your scores and all other things, you will have a better experience of what things need to be improved. And then with that, moving forward in the next year, you can work on those things that were your weaknesses, and then there's a very high chance you'll get it in the next year. And if you look at it overall, in a time period of 4.5 years of your PhD, it's not going to matter, because either you get it in the first 3 years or you get it in the last 3 years, but you will get this scholarship and you'll end up with that and having that title. So start working on it. It's not like if you don't get it this year, it's not the end of the world, because you can always get it the next year.
Okay, the
There's a-
next question. Sorry, Carl, do you have something to add?
Well, I was just going to go. There's a question from Paul George. We're kind of, from at the top.
Yeah. Sorry.
Asking about what type of non-peer-reviewed work fits here. I'm not sure what part of the presentation that was in.
Leadership statement, I think.
The leadership. Okay. Does outreach work apply, or would that be more of a leadership? So yeah, in the leadership statement, so okay, the first place and the place where there's no page limit is your CV. So put absolutely everything you can in your CV, sell it, like add paragraphs to describe it. They might not end up reading it all because they get pretty long, but definitely include everything in your CV. That's your first go-to place to include any work, any volunteer work you've done. As for including your why do I think
you're cutting off?
I'm going to be a good cutout? You hear me?
Okay, you got disconnected. Yeah, we can hear you now.
So think about the story of what's the message you're trying to say in your leadership statement. If it involves this outreach work, then absolutely include it. For mine, I figured out kind of the story of how I wanted to sell myself as this is why I will be a future leader in research, because I have this, I view things in this way. I break things down to simpler problems, and I make a plan to achieve each step sequentially. So then I had to have some examples of how in my life have I already shown that I can do that. So for me, I some outreach stuff, but more for me was athletic achievements I've had. And yeah, a little bit of leadership and volunteering work. But again, what does it relate to your overall story? And there's another point about it, or the special circumstances. So I had originally included a special circumstances letter, kind of explaining all my weaknesses and why they were weaknesses. And when I got selected by UBC to be pushed to the national round, the biggest feedback I got from UBC was, those aren't special circumstances, delete that and resubmit. So I would stay away from special circumstances. When I looked into it at the time, they basically said it's, did you go on maternity leave? And that's why you missed a year. Did you, there's a traumatic death in the family and you missed a lot of research. So stuff like that. Like, why did you have a 5-year absence from school? Yeah. Things like that. But, for me, the reason I was doing, so I didn't have any publications when I applied. I was a co-author on a conference proceedings, and I had a couple in progress works. So I had used the special circumstances to say, hey, this is why I don't have any publications. I was focused on other things, and here's my list of other achievements during this time. And they said that's not circumstances. So just be careful with that.
Fuhar, do you want to take the question of what types of non-peer reviewed works fit here? I think there's a follow-up that they say they meant in the list of publications slide. I can't remember which slide that was. Yeah.
For non-peer reviewed, it could be, say, a non-peer reviewed conference work, or non-peer reviewed, for example, a policy brief that you can write, or an article you wrote for a magazine, or something like that. It still counts, but it might not count as a peer reviewed article, which has a higher value. But if you have something, list it down. And if you think it fits, as Carl and Abhishek said, if it fits your story, you have to highlight it in a way and present it or sell it in a way that it works best.
The next question is, do there have to be 4 different people as your references? You guys want to take that question?
Yeah, I think absolutely. You need 4 different people. You cannot
I
have
was
the
just
same
typing in.
person writing your leadership as well as your academic reference.
Another thing that
Yeah.
I get asked is, do my leadership references need to be outside of academia? They don't really need to be outside of academia. It can be somebody from your undergrad school as well, or your grad school, wherever you're applying.
So for my leadership ones, I used an athletic coach, like a former coach, and then also somebody within UBC he's not my supervisor, but I do a lot of work with him. Kind of a volunteer work, kind of outreach work related to academics. Tough to explain in one sentence, but yeah, so I used one external and one kind of academic leadership. And then for the academic ones, that's more straightforward. Who can speak to your academics?
The next question is how to write the opening and closing paragraphs in leadership statement. I'm just going to tell you what I did. I don't really know what the right way to write it is, but I'll stick to what Carl said. It's your story arc. Now, one thing I do want to add is in your leadership statement, in my leadership statement, I really try to stay away from research because your research contribution or research proposal was all about your work. So in your leadership statement is the only place you can actually come across as what kind of person you are and what drives you to do your work and who you are as a person really. So I basically put everything that interests me outside of my research work. Anything that I've done in terms of volunteering, in the field of art, sports, um, entrepreneurship, everything else. So start off with a story, which is who you are as a person. You're basically introducing yourself, what motivates you, and then kind of make the story as a timeline so that, you know, whichever leadership pointers you actually choose, start off with the earliest one and how they started shaping you as a person and how they kind of contribute towards you as a person today, and then kind of end it with what was your last leadership contribution and how that kind of got you to UBC or to your project today. And at every point, make sure you kind of mention how that contributed towards you being a person and what that quality is going to bring towards you doing a PhD. So for example, one quality that everybody looks at in doing a PhD is problem solving. So if you have any leadership contribution, which actually had you, for example, lead a team to solve a specific problem, that's a great contribution. So things like that. So basically find out qualities and things that you learn from your experiences and how did they shape you as a person today. So speak to how you are as a person rather than, oh, this is how it's going to contribute to my research, this is how it's going to lead my project to some place. It's make it about yourself.
Yeah. So again, it's a leadership letter, not a why I'm going to be good at research letter. So they want to know, this is the one section you can tell them who you are as a person and somebody that doesn't just sit in your office or sit in the lab. So the approach I took was, yeah, saying why I'm going to be a successful leader. And it could be like, it doesn't have to be in academics. It could be later on in industry, or, you know, if I run a business or whatever, why am I going to be a leader? Because I have these, I enjoy working with other people. I have volunteered in all these committees, and I list this. I try to recruit other people to work on these committees and pursue their interests and passions. And I try to give them the resources they need to achieve those passions. And I had examples of how I've done this all along. And then I also did a bit about like my outlook and my career path, where I want to go and why I'm motivated to go in that direction. But it was nothing about research. I think at one point I might have said, you know, because the strategy that I've adopted in my life, I'm going to be successful in my PhD, but nothing specifically about, you know, I'm good at lab work or anything. And as for the specific opening and closing paragraphs, again, the leadership one is where you can get creative. So think about the story arc that you want to tell. I think my original draft of it, I had like a kind of like a hokey, like, you know, athletics have been important for me. So I was like visualizing the race, you know, this is feeling. And then I transitioned that into how I've used academics to achieve, use athletics to achieve goals and that. And then I paralleled that to my research career. but yeah, you can get creative in the leadership statement. That's the one place you can show that you're a person and not just a lab rat.
Well, how do you have something to add?
No, I mean, yeah, it's pretty similar. I mean, the way you guys mentioned, it's just writing a story. So maybe I can
I'll just
share.
add one more thing to what Carl said, which is um, you obviously need to put forward that you do stuff outside of research, um, and therefore your story arc should pretty much be about how you kind of started off on this journey as well. So try to link everything together. Don't just make it as fragments which don't really link up together.
Mhm.
So as he mentioned, he has a love of sports. I'm sure he linked it to how that shaped him to become a person today, and not just, you know, this is what I did, this is what I did. And another thing which a couple of people have asked me before is, I feel like I don't really have any leadership contributions, simply because I haven't done as much as other people have. You might think that, but again, the leadership statement is not for you to boast about your achievements. It's actually to show what kind of person you really are. So even if you have done something really small, you might not know it, but it actually counts. So think about what you have done and how that links to you being a person today, rather than, oh, I haven't really achieved anything. So it's less about your achievements, more about who you are today.
I think that's a good point. It's not, the leadership statement is not somewhere to extend your CV. Your CV will have everything you volunteered, everything you've worked, that has all your, not accomplishments, but everything you've done. But in the leadership statement, think about what you want to explain to people, that you, who you are, and what drives you, where your interests are, and then use your CV, use your volunteer experiences to back that up. I am the kind of person who likes to form groups of my peers, and we set goals and achieve them. Example of this, I did this with, I was on student council, I led these people, and we had this success, and here was our outcomes. So use it to support the story of why you are that person, and why that's going to make you successful in your career in Canada.
Talking about career in Canada, just make sure somewhere in your application you mention why UBC is important to you, like why you chose this as a university, and why it's important to your research and your work today.
Yeah, and it is the government of Canada paying for this research, so you need to explain why it's important this research is done in Canada and what it's going to contribute to Canadian research.
Another thing, in terms of the research contribution, I know there are people who apply in fields which might not have a visible social impact. For example, people who work in modeling, or people who work in stuff like mathematics. You might not really see a visible impact on society, but then if it has an applicability in the future, just make sure you mention that. It obviously studies like cancer research and Alzheimer's research are more impactful immediately, but your work might have an implication in the field of science itself. So don't think that only applications which are important to the society get funded. There are a lot of other research that also gets funded. So just make sure you put forward the applicability and the impact of your research really well.
There's a question here, so that CFAT tagged Fuhar in it.
Yeah, it's on the eligibility.
Sure.
So I'll give a brief comment on that. I mean, so for eligibility, I mean, it's pretty tricky. It's good to check with your department once before you apply. But my experience is that every September applicant has 2 attempts, which is September of the year they are admitted and the September the year after. For all others, it's pretty confusing. So it's always good to check with your department. I'm not too sure for May admits and for January admits how it works.
Do we have any more questions?
I don't see any.
Yep.
Okay, so seeing no further questions, I think we can wrap this up, and we'll be posting the recording, of course, on the YouTube channel for anyone else who missed today's live session. Thank you very much, Fuhar, Abhishek, and Carl. It was very informative. Thank you so much.
Yeah, hope you guys get it. Good
yeah.
luck.
Yeah, good luck, everyone.
Share your email ID if anybody has questions later on, if they can get in touch.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, feel free to let us know if you have any further questions. We'll get back to you. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.